Polish Counter-Strike legend Neo, currently a Virtus Pro, is not just a member of the Golden Five and someone who's a great champion in history and often considered the consensus best player of all time in Counter-Strike 1.6 just because of talent alone. He's a perfect mix of talent and dedication. Someone who worked at his craft year after year, who looked how to adapt his role and was able to change it up, how to adapt how he played against specific opponents when he couldn't necessarily make a player change in his lineup and take someone out, which is the shortcut oftentimes to being able to keep your same exact role and change up how your team's success goes. And he's someone who learned all the smokes and all the spots and how all the teams played and varied it up, and hence is the greatest player of all time. Now, when Neo was doing all of this back in the days of the Golden Five, he didn't have a whole lot of resources and tools at his disposal in order to improve in these ways. He had to come up with his own creative approaches and just grind it out. Over at Boomeo, they have a whole bunch of resources that you have access to if you have premium, and some of these you can check out with the free mode as well if you try it out, where you can go and play the duels mod. You can practice and warm up and alternate between a whole bunch of one-on-one spots on different areas of the map that are real situations where you might peak or be peeked into in a game. Warm up doing them. I get up to like 20 of them in a minute before going in and playing your official. Instead of playing pointless CSDM and getting shot in the back or shooting someone from a really weird angle who's shooting someone else, or having 3 to 4 people in one area shooting in a way that wouldn't happen in a real game, you can practice real situations. Likewise, you can go and you can watch guides from great minds like Fallen, fantastic players like Shocks, up-and-coming stars like Stewie, and find out how do they think about the game? How do they put themselves in their role within the game? How have they adapted over the years to understand what they're doing and then explain why they do it? Now, the Golden Five, that term, is one of the best nicknames in Western esports history. It's rare that we actually have many good nicknames in the West. People aren't as apt to come up with them, and it's not really the same motivation for some reason, because bizarrely, and this is a topic one day I'll do my own video about, Korean esports has been amazing for this. They've come up with the fan base over there has come up with so many great names, particularly in Brood War, but some in League of Legends as well, where they'd have a name for someone that really did just describe the essence of the person. And many times even players later on went on to embody that essence more in how they played, because someone had just really in a prescient manner sort of nailed who they were in coming up with the nickname, and that's why it stuck as well. So the problem is the Golden Five is a fantastic nickname. It is just misapplied in the majority of cases you have heard it used as an esports fan for the last 8 years. Now, whether it's commentators, other players, organizers of tournaments, they still use the term Golden Five to this day. They use it talking about Virtus Pro's lineup. They used it at the end of 1.6 talking about the frag executors and ESC lineups, which had Pasha in them. They continue to use this term, despite the fact it does not apply, and there has not been a Golden Five since the end of 2009. So 8 years ago, well, I mean, not quite 8 years, but over 7 years ago. Now, I understand to one degree why. One, it's just laziness. They haven't looked into why the term exists, who it was supposed to refer to, and they just assume if you have Neo and Taz in a lineup, that means you're a Golden Five, and hence they think Pasha's also a member of the Golden Five. It also is a way to hype the tournament because it's such a cool nickname, and it reminds everyone of things that went by nostalgically that were cool. Also, as a result, it creates this false link to the past, very different lineup from what you have now in Virtus Pro that seemingly carries the story through, we're talking like a 13-year period of time. But in reality, I mean, it's not even that long, actually. That's how far back people go with the logic where they don't even know when the Golden Five started. But that's a way that they do it. But let's just get this clear once and for all. There was only one lineup in history which was the Golden Five. And guess what? It had 5 players. No more, no less. It was Neo, it was Taz, it was Luke, it was Lord, it was Cuban. Neo was the superstar, the all-around carry, one of the hardest carries in history, could do everything, could hybrid orb, had some of the best rifles ever, had really deadly spray, had good pistols, could switch up his position entirely. In the latter days, obviously, became an in-game leader at the very end of 1.6, but played other roles. Taz, one of the greatest sidekicks of all time. At times, a star player himself, especially towards the end of 1.6. Someone with a specialty skill for playing certain spots on CT side, on some of the harder maps, Train, Nuke, for example. Someone who had a lot of fire, who really was the heart of the team in many ways. A long-time veteran, someone who managed to overcome a lot of issues. Someone who's willing to be an entry fragger in the days when a lot of people didn't want to do that. and also a long-time mainstay of the team along with Neo. Then you had Luke. He was the hybrid AWPer, but he mainly used the AWP role in general. He didn't always have it. It wasn't like a Guardian who just got dropped every round. But if he could, he would get an AWP. And the thing is, he wasn't a godlike AWPer, but he was just an Alu type AWPer. He holds his angle. He knows how to hit the clutch shot. He knows his ranges. And he was also a very fiery character as well. Then you had Lord. Now, this is someone where he's famous, where before Senya came along in Na'Vi, this was the prototypical support player that you want to be able to win championships because he's cool under pressure, he's good in clutch situations, especially prior to the era when Pasha came in. He was willing to play the support role, to do the things, the dirty work people didn't want to do. Then he had Cuban. Now, for a lot of his career, yes, the support player. For periods of time after Taz and before Neo, he was the in-game leader, especially in the latter days when they had Pasha. And he's someone where he was more of a cerebral player, hence why he's now the coach of Virtus Pro. Those are the 5 players in the Golden 5. There are no more players, and there will not be another Golden 5. Now, why were they called the Golden 5? Well, those 5 players had the most success in CS 1.6 majors of any players in history. Together, they won either 4 or 5 majors, depending on how you're counting them. So they won the World Cyber Games in 2006, shortly after they'd made the 5-man lineup. They beat NIP in the final. NIP was heavily favoured. NIP was the team of the year. They beat them anyway. They beat... NIP, by the way, had like Zet, Spawn, bunch of legendary players, Vale. Then in 2007, their next major, they beat H2K, a Danish lineup, at the Intel Extreme Masters, the first ever edition. Now, this is why I say they won 4 or 5 majors, because personally, I don't count this one as a major, because it was a tournament that was only for Europeans. It was not open to North Americans or Asians, and at the time, they had some of the better teams as well, particularly Asia. And so, to me, even though future IEM finals were majors, because they did fit that criteria, personally, I don't count this one. But some people do. Some people, as a result, say that they won more than one IEM. I mean, they didn't actually, if you know, go and look at the fact it was a different lineup, but that's one of the things people say. The third major came, actually right after this, which was ESWC. Now, they won ESWC against NOA, another Danish lineup. The HK team they'd won, by the way, was Wimp's team. It was like a transition team he was on. Not that good. They were probably favourites in that one. 2007, they won ESWC. They were playing against NOA, which was Sunder, and it was Ave, and it was Zonic. It was basically everyone out of the MTW that would become godlike in the next year, except they had HPX at the time and not Wimp. And actually, HPX was one of the stars of the team, one of the AWP players who was very, very good. Now, yes, the Poles were favoured here, and yes, they won this match, although it was fairly close still. Then you came to 2008, a year later, they repeated. They won the second ESWC title. They beat Istro, the South Korean team, with Bale and Solo. And interestingly enough, yes, they were favoured because the South Korean team had never been in the final of a major and never would actually win a major, but it was very, very close. And it really came down to the wire on the third map, Tuscan, which actually both teams weren't familiar with, but especially not the South Koreans. And it was a 16-13 game. But they went back-to-back at ESWC, and then they won their second WCG title in 2009, when in the final, they'd struggled all year to get back to top form, and had all these organizational problems, and they played against Fnatic, who had been winning everything that year, including the first major of the year, and were one of the most dominant teams of all time. And no one thought this team, at the time called Again, but the Golden Five, was going to be able to win this final. And they didn't even in the first map look like they were going to. They were losing on Nuke, but famously they had this epic comeback. They won in overtime. They won the second map on Train. They won this WCG. And so the Golden Five won 2 WCGs, 2 ESWCs, and then if you count it, 1 IEM. They won 5 majors. Now, what's significant about that is no other 5-man lineup in CSGO CS 1.6 history ever won 5 majors, or 4 even. The only one, well, that's not correct, never won 5 majors. Now, Na'Vi, the lineup that stayed together for about just over 2.5 years, the Ukrainians at the end of 1.6 won 4 majors in a row, and they won 4 total. So yes, they've either matched or they were 1 major behind the Poles. But that was in the latter years of 1.6. Na'Vi's run of majors didn't actually begin until after the Golden Five had stopped existing, because the Golden Five goes up to the end of 2009. They also, by the way, as the Golden Five, made it to the final of the IEM3 major, the one that Fnatic won in 2009, but they lost that one. Now, part of the reason they're the Golden Five is not just they're the five-man lineup that won the most majors, but it's the way that they won it. The way they won it suggested that this wasn't just a special lineup because they win, but the way that they win. There is something magical about this lineup, and that's what makes them golden and makes them champions. Because in most of those finals, they were actually underdogs. At the World Cyber Games, they were an underdog. In both of them, 2006, 2009, they were underdogs to heavily favoured Swedish teams who were the teams of the year. Then you go and you look, the NOA one is sort of in the middle, and then they had a couple where they were favourites, but by just a bit. Despite being underdogs, they won all these finals. They were never the best team of the year at any point during the Golden Five. Now, with Pasha, later they became the best team of the year at the end of 2011 as a technicality, but in this lineup, the 3.5 years, they were never the best team of the year, and yet they won the most majors over that span of time, and in CS history. They were also not the best team because they were inconsistent outside of majors. Outside of majors, they'd win a major, then they'd bomb the next tournament and finish like outside the top 8. And they wouldn't win a lot of the other tournaments. And they'd have their problems with a big team at the semi-finals of another tournament that they'd then beat in a major to win the major. So there was clearly something about them where they rose in terms of performance under pressure, whereas other people break and they're worse. So, for example, Forest's teams won tons of tier 2 and good tier 1 stacked tournaments, but not the majors. He won very few. He only won 3 majors in his career. These guys, this 5, were the opposite. They didn't win all the other tournaments, but they would come up to the top, rise to the top in the major, and in the hardest moment, they'd win in epic fashion. Often, they won in very, very epic fashion and didn't crush people and just won the tournament, but in doing so, won the 4 or 5 majors, however you count it. So, one of the things about this lineup is they famously had a lot of different organizations they played under. So they played under Pentagram initially, and then they went to Meet Your Makers when Meet Your Makers had this massive amount of money before the recession in 2008, 2008. And so they were mega highly paid there. Then after that, they had all these problems while they were the Golden Five. They went to an organization called Vitriolic, which ended up falling apart. Then they became Again, which wasn't an organization. It was just a name that they took because they had been without an organization again. So they went and won World Cyber Games just under that alias. Now, the way that this team got formed tells you the history of it. Neo, Taz, and Luke had actually already been members and teammates of Pentagram for a couple of years. I think Pentagram was formed in like 2004 or something. They'd been rivals before then, but they'd teamed up in this like best team in Poland with some other Polish players who a lot you won't have heard of now. And they'd already been a good team. Neo was already clearly a talented star and someone who was good. He just hadn't been to many of the bigger tournaments. And when they started to go to the bigger tournaments, they were good. They could cause big upsets, but they were nowhere near yet winning majors. Now, Lord joined up with the lineup in early 2006, but then left again, went off. I think he played with Cuban actually. And then what happened is Cuban and Lord joined the team in the summer. I think that was the order it went in, or Cuban or Lord had played with Cuban beforehand, and then Cuban just joined in the summer and Lord was already there. Something along those lines, so that it was in July, at the end of July in 2006, when Cuban's the final 5th member to join, and that's when the Golden Five is set. They then go ahead and they win 4 majors. They win World Cyber Games 2006. 2007, they win IEM, they win ESWC, depending on if you count IEM. And then 2008, they win ESWC, but they bomb some of the next tournaments. And so what happens is they actually kick Cuban out of the team in November, early November of 2008. And they brought in a player called Pionas, who'd been playing in the second best team at the time. And they gave this guy a try for a solid 3 months. And then what happened was, at the very beginning of February, the next year, 2009, they kicked out Pionas and they brought back Cuban. They just reversed the move. And actually, what's interesting is there had been some scandal there, because when they kicked out Pionas, originally they were going to kick out Luke to get Pionas, but instead something happened. They had a meeting and they decided instead to side with Luke, and they actually kicked out Cuban instead. And they didn't have a good period of form after that. They actually struggled. They weren't winning tournaments, which is what they hoped to do as a result of making the Cuban move. They brought Cuban back, and immediately they were into the final of the next major. And obviously later on, they would go on to win another major together. Now, what happened was, at the end of 2009, so a month or two after winning World Cyber Games in epic fashion, they went to a tournament called WEM, the World Esports Masters, which was held in China, in Hangzhou, China, and it was organized by Kan Yang, who's now an MVP project, who also organized the eStars tournaments in Korea, and WEG, World Esports Games, back in the day of 2005, 2006. And at this tournament, They couldn't attend with, I believe it was Taz who couldn't attend. And so they had Pasha, who was an up-and-coming player in the Polish scene, stand in for them. And they managed to get top 4 at this tournament, but they had to play Fnatic in the semi-finals, and they lost to Fnatic in the semi-finals in a rage-inducing manner. There's a famous video that I recorded that's out there of them going, Kurva! Which is pretty epic. And they decided to kick Luke out of the team, who, remember I said before, at the end of 2008, could have been kicked. And this time, Pasha was the player recruited, and he was recruited permanently. And then you had a different era of the team. The Golden Five ends at that point in time. Now, when Pasha replaces Luke, interestingly enough, they didn't win a major for almost 2 years after that. Now, by the time it got to the summer of 2010, he joined in early 2010, they were able to win tournaments already. They could finally get to the point where they could win eStars Seoul, and they could place top 4 at the majors by the end of the year. But it wasn't until WCG 2011 that they won another major. And obviously it wasn't with the Golden Five at this point in time, because they had Pasha in line, not Luke. They won got WCG 2011, and then the next major after that, the last 2 majors of CS 1.6, which was IEM 6 Global Finals, or World Championship, whatever you want to call it at the time, where they beat Na'Vi in the final. And in WCG 2011, they beat SK in the final of Forest and Get Right and Roban. Now, as a lineup, they had a lot of other success at majors. For example, they placed top 4 at 4 other majors. It was 2010 ESWC, they placed top 4, but they lost to SK Gaming in the semi-finals and lost to MTW in the 3rd place game. And then they got to the semi-finals of the WCG, won the bronze medal 2010. They had to play Na'Vi in the semi-finals there. They got to the final of IEM 5 World Championship in 2011, but lost to Na'Vi there, and that was Na'Vi's 4th major in a row. And then in 2011 at ESWC, they placed top 4 there, and they lost to Na'Vi in the semi-finals, and then they actually lost, interestingly enough, to Mouse Sports, who had Carrigan at the time, and just placed 4th. So the key thing is, if you really wanted to try and force it, you could maybe say there was 2 Golden Fives. There was the Golden Five that won the 4 or 5 majors, that won 5-man lineup. And then there was Golden Five 2.0, which was the lineup, or Golden Five 2, which is the one that won 2 majors together and had a lot of top placings. But winning 2 majors isn't as crazy, actually. That's not something that stands out as much. And that lineup with Pasha wasn't really the same kind of flavour to the team, because Pasha actually became, by the time they won those 2 majors, one of the stars of the team, one of the better players in the team, and really started to join Neo and Taz, and obviously was considered the MVP of IEM 6 World Championship, actually. So, yeah, you could call them another Golden Five. Personally, I would say make a different name, though, because it's kind of pointless to call them the Golden Five, because there was one Golden Five, there will only be one Golden Five, and no one's ever going to be in that unique position for what Golden Five represents. It wasn't just the golden element, winning all the majors together, and the most ever in history, but the fact that it was clear that that 5-man lineup was very special, just in the way that they would come and win the majors, and the coming as an underdogs and being able to battle through and be victorious. And so, no, Virtus.pro winning 1 major in CSGO doesn't count as a Golden Five. It's not about winning other good tournaments and 1 major. There was 1 Golden Five, and they haven't been around since end of 2009, early 2010.
Hello, this is Neo, just an average CSGO player, and you're watching Thorin's YouTube channel.
What up, guys? This is Jordan Gilbert.
We work with the world's top pros to teach you how to take your game to the next level with constantly updated training content. When you're done watching and want to train or warm up, just a few clicks will put you in your preferred training mods like Deathmatch. But why warm up for a match on Mirage by getting shot in the back on Dust 2? That's why we built Duels, real fights and real maps. 1 minute in Duels is like 20 rounds of real CS. Exclusively available on Boomeo.com.